The quiet street that wasn't when we first drove into that little neighborhood. I thought I had finally found the kind of place people write postcards about. The street curved gently, lined with tall, leafy trees whose branches intertwined above the road like protective arms. Sunlight filtered through in golden streaks, casting playful patterns across neatly manicured lawns and picket fences. Every house had its own personality: painted shutters, blooming gardens, wind chimes swaying in the breeze. I imagined children riding their bikes, neighbors waving from porches, and weekend barbecues where everyone knew each other's names. For the first time in years, the air around me felt light, almost hopeful. My wife, Emily, was sitting in the passenger seat with her chin propped on her hand, eyes scanning the row of homes as if she were memorizing every detail. "This is it," she murmured, her smile warm and certain. "We could really belong here." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my chest. The moving truck groaned to a stop in front of our new house, a two-story with pale blue siding, white trim, and a wraparound porch that seemed perfect for morning coffee. We hopped out, the excitement still buzzing in our veins, and began unloading boxes. I was halfway up the ramp, carrying the heaviest one of the day, when the sharp, staccato rhythm of high heels on pavement sliced through the peaceful quiet. I turned my head, and there she was marching toward us with a posture so rigid it looked painful, clutching a thick binder against her chest like it was a weapon. Papers stuck out at odd angles, fluttering slightly with each step. Her expression was one part disapproval, one part pure authority, and it was aimed squarely at us. "You're blocking the sidewalk," she announced without preamble, her voice clipped like she was reading a citation. Emily and I exchanged a confused glance before I managed, "Oh, sorry about that. We'll move it as soon as we finish unloading." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "It needs to be moved now." Her tone was final, as though the words had been carved in stone. She introduced herself as Karen, the name delivered in such a way that it felt like an order to remember. "I'm responsible for maintaining community standards," she added, her chin tilting higher, "and violations are taken seriously." She proceeded to rattle off a list of rules: garbage bin placement, approved flower bed designs, even acceptable curtain colors. Each sentence felt like it was aimed to strip away any sense of comfort we had just built. The binder in her arms might as well have been a sword the way she wielded it. I forced a polite smile, but deep down, unease began to curl in my stomach. This wasn't the warm welcome I'd envisioned, it was a warning. When she finally spun on her heel and stalked away, I let out a slow breath, wondering if she was just an overly enthusiastic neighbor or something more dangerous. The answer came sooner than I expected. The very next morning, a neon pink flyer was taped to our porch railing. The list of neighborhood standards inside read like a military operations manual. Lawn height was specified down to the inch. Trash bins had designated display. Hours. Garden gnomes had to be under 12 inches tall and tastefully muted in color. At the bottom was an emblem for something called the Neighborhood Oversight Council, complete with a logo that looked suspiciously like it had been designed on a home computer. Emily stared at it, incredulous. "Does this woman not have hobbies?" She muttered. Later that day, I bumped into a neighbor named Brian while he was walking his beagle. We struck up a conversation, and when I mentioned the flyer, he gave me a look that was half pity, half warning. "You're new here, so you don't know," he said quietly, glancing around like someone might be listening. "Karen runs this neighborhood like her own kingdom. She finds people for the smallest things, and she's got connections." My eyebrows lifted. "Connections?" Brian nodded, lowering his voice further. "There's this guy, calls himself security. Shows up in a uniform, badge and all. Nobody knows if he's legit, but he acts like a cop, and Karen uses him to keep people in line. Most folks just pay the fines to avoid trouble." The words sank in like ice water. A self-appointed enforcer with no real oversight that was a recipe for abuse. I thanked Brian and walked home, my thoughts heavy. Emily listened as I told her, her jaw tightening. So she's got her own guard dog. Great. The sarcasm in her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. We tried to push it out of our minds, telling ourselves maybe we were overthinking it. That weekend, we hosted a small barbecue to break the ice with the neighborhood. A few friendly faces showed up, laughter mingled with the scent of burgers and grilled corn. And for a couple of hours, I believed maybe things would be okay. Then I noticed movement at the far edge of our yard. A shadow slipped just beyond the fence. I told myself it was nothing, but when I walked over with a flashlight, I found fresh footprints in the grass-heavy ones, too big to belong to any kid. My stomach sank. The next morning, another note was pinned to our gate, this time accusing us of holding an unapproved social gathering and threatening fines for excessive noise. Emily shook her head, lips pressed tight. She's not going to stop, she said, her voice low. If she's sending her so-called security to spy on us, this is just the beginning. I was sipping my coffee when I noticed a black sedan parked down the street. It was the kind of car that looked deliberately inconspicuous, but somehow stood out against the suburban backdrop. Emily came to stand beside me at the window, her eyes narrowing. "That's him," she said. "The security guy." We watched as he sat there for nearly 10 minutes, then got out a tall, stocky man in a cheap-looking uniform. The badge on his chest gleamed in the sun, but something about it seemed off. He scanned the street with an air of authority that felt forced, then began a slow patrol in our direction, clipboard in hand. Emily's hand brushed mine, but when I looked at her, there was no fear, only a cool, assessing calm. I almost smiled, remembering something important. My wife wasn't just any woman. She was an FBI special agent. And if this man thought he could intimidate us, he was in for a very rude awakening. Asterisk. The man in the knockoff uniform walked with a deliberate slowness, like each step was meant to send a message. His boots were heavy, the kind that crunched gravel even on a smooth sidewalk. The clipboard in his hand was stacked with papers that looked more like photocopied forms than anything official, but he held it as if it contained the fate of the entire neighborhood. His eyes scanned each property he passed, lingering on details, trash cans pulled too far forward, lawn ornaments a shade too bright, cars parked a little too close to the curb. He paused outside our home, making a point to look up at the porch where Emily and I stood. His gaze lingered just long enough to feel like a challenge before he scribbled something on his paper. Emily didn't flinch. She crossed her arms, her stance casual, but her eyes sharp. "Notice how his badge doesn't catch the light like a real one?" She murmured without looking at me. "It's because it's cheap tin. Probably ordered online for $30. I glanced at her, realizing she was already assessing him like she would a suspect. Her years in the bureau had trained her to spot Tell's nervous habits, the weight distribution of someone carrying a concealed weapon, the difference between genuine authority and a performance. The man stepped onto our driveway without asking, stopping a few feet from the porch. "Good morning," he said, though his tone made it sound more like an interrogation. "I'm Officer Grant, Security Liaison for the Neighborhood Oversight Council." His voice was deep, but carried a faint strain, as if he was forcing himself to sound calm. He produced a laminated card from his chest pocket, holding it up for us to see. Even from the porch, I could tell it wasn't a government-issued ID, no holograms, no state seal, just a plain photo, a name, and a logo identical to the one on Karen's flyers. Emily didn't bother to step closer. "Interesting," she said evenly. "Which security company are you licensed through?" The man blinked, just for a moment, and I caught it, a flicker of uncertainty. "Neighborhood Oversight Council contracts me directly," he replied, shifting his weight. "I enforce community guidelines and address violations." He said it with such finality that I almost laughed, but the tension in the air kept me. Still, and what violation are you here for today? I asked, my voice careful but edged. He glanced down at his clipboard. Noise complaint from last night, unapproved gathering. Possible obstruction of public access during move-in. His eyes flicked up, meeting mine in a way that felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced this in a mirror. Emily tilted her head slightly. Funny, she said, because I don't recall signing a contract agreeing to any of these rules. And, unless you have a municipal citation, you're trespassing right now. The man's jaw tightened. It's in the HOA bylaws. Emily stepped forward one pace, the porch creaking under her foot. Then show me the registration for this HOA. Show me its legal charter with the county clerk's stamp. Her voice was steady, each word pronounced with the kind of calm authority that made my own pulse quicken. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then, as if deciding this wasn't going the way he wanted, the man stepped back toward the sidewalk. I'll be watching, he said flatly, turning away. The phrase wasn't a casual comment, it was a promise. Emily watched him go, her eyes narrowing until he disappeared around the corner. That night, the unease returned like a cold draft under the door. Around 10, I heard the low hum of an engine idling somewhere close. I peeked through the blinds, and there he was again, parked in the same black sedan, lights off, his silhouette barely visible behind the windshield. Emily joined me at the window, her expression unreadable. He's testing boundaries, she murmured. Seeing if we'll confront him or ignore him. She turned away, already pulling out her phone. I'm logging every encounter, date, time, his actions. If this escalates, we'll have a file ready. The next morning, we woke to find our mailbox hanging open and the inside completely empty. At first, I thought maybe the mail hadn't come yet, but when I checked the neighboring houses, every other mailbox was closed. My gut twisted. Emily's face hardened. Tampering with mail is a federal crime, she said, her voice cool but edged with steel. If he's stupid enough to do it again, I'll make sure he learns exactly how long the sentence can be. Later that afternoon, as I was unloading groceries from the car, I noticed Karen standing on the sidewalk with the fake officer. They were speaking in low tones, occasionally glancing in my direction. Karen's expression was smug, while his remained unreadable. When they finally walked away, I caught a glimpse of his hand resting casually near his hip, not touching anything, but close enough to make me wonder what he thought he was ready to use. That night, Emily sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open to a page displaying private security licensing requirements. He's not on the registry, she said without looking up. Which means he's just a civilian in a costume. The only authority he has is what people are too scared to question. She closed the laptop with a soft click. But he picked the wrong house to try this on. The days that followed felt like living under a microscope. Every time I stepped outside, I caught sight of that black sedan somewhere on the street. Sometimes it was parked at the far end, sometimes only a few houses away, but it was always there. Neighbors began to give us wary looks, as if we'd somehow invited trouble into the neighborhood. Emily stayed calm, but I could see the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she scanned the street before opening the front door. Then came the moment that changed everything. Late one evening, I was sitting in the living room when I heard Emily's voice from the porch, firm and raised slightly. I rushed to the door and froze. The fake cop was standing at the bottom of the steps, one hand gripping a black holster. At his side, Emily's stance was steady, her hands visible but her gaze locked on his face. You might want to think very carefully about your next move, she was saying. The man's jaw was tight, his eyes flicking between her and the street. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first time his hand had drifted toward his weapon. And it wouldn't be the last. The line he shouldn't have crossed the following morning dawned gray, with clouds hanging low enough to brush the tops of the maple trees. The air felt heavier than usual, as though the weather itself sensed the tension brewing on our quiet street. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, staring absently out the window at the stillness beyond. Emily was across from me, scrolling through her phone, her face a calm mask but her eyes alert. She had been doing that more often lately, watching, waiting, studying patterns that most people would dismiss as coincidence. To her, nothing was coincidence. She saw the world through a lens sharpened by years of tracking dangerous people, and the man in the black sedan had just become her latest case study. It was nearly noon when I stepped outside to take out the recycling. The street was empty, or so I thought, until I caught movement in my peripheral vision. There he was again, the fake cop, standing halfway down the block with his arms folded across his chest, watching our house. Not casually, not in the way a neighbor might glance around while out for a walk. His eyes were fixed, unblinking, like a predator gauging the distance to its prey. I forced myself not to stare back, tossing the recycling into the bin with more noise than necessary, hoping it would signal that I'd seen him and didn't care. But the truth was, I cared a lot. By the time I went back inside, Emily was already at the front door, peering through the blinds. "He's been there for 15 minutes, she said quietly. "Same stance, same posture. He's waiting for something." She stepped away from the window and began pacing slowly, her mind clearly turning over possibilities. "If he approaches again, let me handle it," she added, her tone leaving no room for argument. That evening, I was in the garage organizing boxes when I heard the sound of heavy boots on the driveway. The footsteps stopped just outside the open garage door, and when I looked up, he was there close enough that I could see the scuff marks on his boots and the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Evening," he said flatly. "Got a notice for you." He held out a sheet of paper that looked suspiciously like the ones Karen had delivered. Only this one had my name scrawled in thick black ink at the top. "What's this about?" I asked, taking it. The list of violations included ridiculous items: grass height exceeding standards, an unauthorized backyard structure, our grill, and unverified occupancy of the residence. My jaw clenched. "We've been here less than 2 weeks," I said evenly. "And there's no HOA here recognized by the county." His expression didn't change. "You'll want to address it before penalties increase." I took a slow step forward, closing the distance between us by half. "And if I don't?" I asked. His lips curved just slightly, not a smile, but something colder. "Then I escalate." He didn't specify what that meant, and the ambiguity was worse than a direct threat. Before I could respond, Emily's voice came from behind me. "Everything okay out here?" She stepped into view, her presence instantly shifting the balance of the encounter. The man's eyes flicked to her, and for the briefest moment, I saw something like recognition or maybe hesitation flash across his face. "Just delivering a notice," he said, taking a small step back. Emily didn't break eye contact with him. "Then you've done your job. You can leave now." Her voice was steady, professional, the kind that left no room for negotiation. He hesitated, then turned and walked away, but his pace was slower than it needed to be, like he wanted us to see that he was in no hurry. That night, I woke around 2 a.m. to the faint sound of gravel crunching outside. Emily was already sitting up in bed, listening. We moved quietly to the window, and sure enough, the black sedan was parked right across from our house. Its headlights were off, but the faint glow of a cigarette tip pulsed in the darkness. "He's not just watching anymore," Emily whispered. "He's testing how close he can get without crossing a legal line. This is about intimidation." The next day proved she was right. I was in the backyard trimming hedges when I heard the creak of our side gate swinging open. My first thought was that a neighbor had come to talk, but when I turned, it was him stepping onto our property like he owned it. "You can't be back here," I said sharply. He didn't respond, just glanced around at our yard, jotting something down on his clipboard. Emily came out the back door, her voice sharp enough to cut through the humid afternoon air. "Step off this property, now." For the first time, his expression shifted into something openly hostile. "You don't tell me what to do," he said, his voice low but tight. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, and I recognized the look. It was the one she used when she was 2 seconds away from taking control of a volatile situation. "Actually," she said, stepping closer, "I do. And unless you want to find yourself explaining to a real law enforcement agency why you were trespassing, you're going to turn around and walk out that gate." He stood there for a long, tense moment, his hand resting lightly near his belt, not on a weapon, but close enough to make my stomach knot. Then, with a grunt, he turned and walked away, slamming the gate behind him. Emily exhaled slowly. "He's escalating," she said, "and next time he might not back down." It was only later, as the sun was setting, that I noticed something chilling. On the side of the house, tucked just behind the gardenias, was a small black object with a blinking red light. Emily crouched down, inspecting it with careful hands. "Wireless camera," she murmured. "Not ours." I didn't need to ask who it belonged to. The night he pushed too far, the discovery of the hidden camera changed everything. It was no longer just a matter of some overzealous neighbor harassing us. It had crossed into outright surveillance. Emily handled the device with gloved hands, her expression unreadable as she examined the small black casing. "Off-the-shelf model," she murmured. "Battery-powered, wireless. Whoever planted this wanted to monitor without getting too close. But the placement means he's been on our property at least twice. Once to put it here, once to retrieve or check it." She slipped it into an evidence bag she kept for her work and set it on the kitchen counter. "We're not dealing with someone who's just playing dress-up anymore," she said quietly. "He's escalating towards something physical." The next 2 days passed in an uneasy blur. Every time I stepped outside, I caught glimpses of that black sedan sometimes idling at the corner, sometimes parked directly across from us, always with the same shadowed figure inside. At night, the sound of a distant engine would pull me from sleep, only to find him sitting there in the dark cigarette ember, glowing faintly like a single watchful eye. Emily kept documenting everything: times, dates, photos from discreet angles. But the strain was beginning to settle into our bones. Even the neighbors seemed to feel it. The few who had been friendly now offered only quick nods, their eyes sliding away as if afraid to get involved. On the third night after finding the camera, the situation turned. We had just finished dinner when Emily's phone buzzed with notification from our own security system. The motion sensor by the driveway had triggered. She pulled up the feed, and there he was walking slowly toward the house, flashlight beams sweeping over our porch and windows. Emily set the phone down with deliberate care, her voice low but edged with something lethal. "Stay inside," she said, heading for the door. I followed anyway, keeping back as she stepped onto the porch. "You're trespassing," she called out, her tone carrying the kind of authority that could freeze most people mid-step. But he didn't stop. The beam of his flashlight slid over her, pausing for a fraction of a second before he clicked it off, plunging us into shadow. "Got a complaint about suspicious activity here," he said, voice deep but unsteady. "Thought I'd check it." "Out. This is private property," Emily replied evenly. "You've already been told to stay off it." He took another step closer, the dim light from the street lamp catching the curve of his jaw and the narrow glint in his eyes. "Funny thing about suspicious activity," he said. "It tends to happen after dark." His hand shifted slightly. At his side, fingers brushing against what looked unmistakably like the grip of a sidearm, I felt the air around us tighten, every sound from the street seeming to fade until there was only the low hum of tension between them. Emily didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply angled her body slightly, her stance balanced and ready. "You want to keep that hand where I can see it," she said, her voice still calm, but now carrying a weight that made my pulse hammer. He hesitated, his gaze darting over her, like he was trying to measure whether she was bluffing. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he stepped back. "Just doing my job," he muttered, though the words sounded more like retreat than justification. He turned and walked toward the sedan, his boots crunching over the pavement, but even as he reached the driver's side door, he paused to look back at us. That look, cold, deliberate, told me this wasn't over. Inside, Emily locked the door and stood there for a moment, her breathing controlled but deep. "He's testing my reactions," she said finally. "Next time, he'll push harder to see if I break." She sat at the table, pulling her phone toward her. "We need a contingency. If he draws, we end this on our terms." The words sent a chill through me, not because I doubted her ability to handle herself, but because I knew what it meant. The quiet games were done. He was moving toward a confrontation that neither of us could walk away from without changing everything. 2 nights later, the storm broke. It was close to midnight when the pounding started, 3 heavy knocks at the door that rattled the frame. I was halfway down the hall when I heard Emily's voice, low and firm, from the other side of the entryway. "Identify yourself." There was no answer at first, just the sound of breathing, loud enough to carry through the wood. Then his voice came, low and taunting. "Open the door, agent." The title hit me like a jolt. He knew. Somehow he knew exactly who Emily was. The word agent echoed in the hallway like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the air. I froze mid-step, my eyes snapping to Emily's face. Her expression barely shifted, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the quick calculation of a woman who knew her cover was compromised. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just guessing anymore. He had done his digging, and now he wanted us to know it. Emily didn't open the door. Instead, she stood just inside her, hand resting lightly on the doorknob, her stance angled so she could see me over her shoulder. Without speaking, she mouthed a single word, "Record." I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit the camera, the red dot blinking silently in my palm. Outside, the man shifted his weight, the sound of his boots scraping over the welcome mat. "I know you've been watching me," he said. "I know you've been collecting evidence. That's not going to end well for you." His voice carried a kind of smugness, but underneath it was something sharper, a threat of unease he couldn't quite hide. Emily let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill it. He tapped the door once with his knuckles, slower now, almost rhythmic. "You think your badge means something here?" he said. "This is my neighborhood, my rules, and if you think you can intimidate me, you're dead wrong." Her voice, when it came, was calm enough to make my own skin prickle. "Walk away." Just 2 words, spoken without a shred of hesitation. On the other side there was a pause, and then the sound of movement, heavy, deliberate. "You know what?" he said. "Let's make this real simple." The next sound was faint but unmistakable, the click of a holster snap releasing. My pulse kicked hard, heat flashing through my chest. Emily's body shifted, her weight settling into the stance I had seen her take at the firing range, countless times, feet braced, shoulders square, hands poised to move faster than thought. Without breaking her line of sight to the door, she said evenly, "You draw on me, you better be ready for what comes next." But he didn't stop. The metallic scrape of a gun clearing leather filled the air, a sound that felt louder than thunder in the stillness of our home. My grip tightened on the phone, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I edged toward the wall, angling myself out of the direct line between the two of them, every instinct screaming to stay out of the way, through the narrow gap. At the edge of the blinds, I caught a glimpse, his arm extended, the silhouette of the gun unmistakable under the porch light. He wasn't aiming yet, but the gesture was clear. He wanted control, and he thought fear would give it to him, Emily's. Tone didn't change. "Drop it." It wasn't a plea. It was an order, the kind that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. The man hesitated, just for a beat, and I knew he had felt it, that shift in the air when someone realizes they've misjudged their opponent. "You don't scare me," he said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. Emily took one step forward, her hand now visible with her phone angled just enough to capture his face and the weapon. "You're already on camera," she said, "and every second you hold that gun, you're building the case that will put you away." Somewhere down the street, an engine rumbled. Tires on pavement. The sound grew closer, and for the first time, I saw his eyes flick toward the road. His stance faltered, not much, but enough for me to know something had cracked. Then, like an answer to an unspoken call, a dark SUV swung into view, headlights cutting across the street and flooding the front of our house. The SUV rolled to a stop behind his sedan, the driver's door opening before the engine even fully died. Two figures stepped out, both in tactical gear, their movements smooth and precise. Emily didn't turn her head, but I saw the way her shoulders loosened just slightly. The man in front of her stiffened, his gun lowering by an inch as the taller of the two agents approached, voice carrying sharp across the quiet night. "Put the weapon down, now." In that moment, the balance shifted completely. His bravado seemed to drain away, replaced by the stark realization that whatever game he thought he was playing had just reached a level he wasn't equipped for. His gaze darted between Emily, the agents, and his own gun, and for the first time since we'd met him, he looked uncertain. And that was the first real crack in the armor of the man who thought he owned our street. The collapse of control for a long moment. The street was silent, except for the low hum of the SUV's engine. The porch light spilled over the scene like a stage spotlight, catching every shift of muscle, every twitch of indecision on the fake cop's face. His gun was still in his hand, though now it hung a little lower, the confidence that had carried him here leaking away with every passing second. The two agents from the SUV moved forward with the kind of controlled precision that only comes from long years of training, their boots hitting the pavement in perfect sync. One had his sidearm drawn, the other carried a less lethal but equally intimidating tactical shotgun. "Weapon down, now." The taller agent's voice was not loud, but it carried that unshakable authority that made ignoring it impossible. The man's jaw clenched, and for a flicker of a second, I saw the war behind his eyes, pride against fear, defiance against the primal urge to survive. His fingers twitched on the grip of his pistol, and Emily took that moment to step down. One stare, closing the gap between them. She didn't draw her own weapon, but the way she moved carried its own kind of power. "You've already lost this," she told him, her tone steady. "The only choice you have left is whether you walk away in cuffs or in a body bag." Something in her voice must have hit him harder than the agent's weapons did. His gaze darted to her, then back to the agents, and I saw his chest rise and fall in a sharp, shallow breath. Slowly, painfully slowly, he bent his elbow and lowered the gun toward the ground. The metallic clink of it hitting the porch boards sounded like the end of a storm. But before relief could even set in, one of the agents stepped forward, kicking the weapon back toward the SUV while the other moved in, voice crisp. "Hands behind your head. Down on your knees." That was when the fight in him flared one last time. He took a half step back, shoulders tightening, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might actually run. But the agents were faster. In one fluid motion, the taller one closed the distance, twisting his arm up and forcing him forward until his knees hit the ground. The other agent was already on him, securing his wrists with cuffs that clicked shut with finality. Emily didn't move until they had him fully restrained. Only then did she step forward, crouching slightly to meet his eyes. "You thought you could threaten me in my own home. You thought a fake badge and a borrowed gun made you untouchable." But here's the truth, you were never in control. Not for a single second. Her words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were cold, precise, and they cut deeper than any insult could. As the agents hauled him to his feet, Karen appeared from the shadows down the block. She had her arms wrapped tightly around that infamous binder, her face pale in the porch. "Light, what is going on?" she demanded, her voice shaking between outrage and fear. Emily didn't even turn to look at her. "Go back inside, Karen. Your little empire is over." The words hung in the air like a final gavel strike, and Karen froze, clutching her binder like it was a life preserver in a sinking ship. The agents guided the fake cop toward the SUV, reading him his rights in measured tones. I watched as they opened the rear door and pushed him inside, his head ducked, his earlier arrogance gone. The sight should have brought pure satisfaction, but what I felt was something heavier, a slow, grounding relief that the constant pressure we'd been living under was finally breaking. When the SUV pulled away, Emily turned to me, her face softer now, but her eyes still sharp. "He'll face charges for unlawful possession of a firearm, impersonating an officer, trespassing, stalking, and that's just the start. With the camera and the mail tampering, he'll be lucky if he sees daylight in the next decade." She exhaled, shoulders loosening as the tension finally began to ebb. "But make no mistake, Karen, we'll try to find someone else to do her dirty work. People like her don't change. They just adapt." That night, the street was quieter than I had ever heard it. The black sedan was gone, the shadow of constant surveillance lifted. Emily sat beside me on the porch, a mug of tea warming her hands, the hum of the cicadas the only sound in the air. "You know," I said after a long pause, "when we first moved here, I thought this place was perfect. I thought it was all lemonade stands and friendly waves." She gave a faint smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes but means more than a laugh. "Perfection's an illusion," she said. "What matters is whether you can hold your ground when it shatters." And as I looked down that once threatening street, now still under the blanket of night, I knew we had done exactly that.